Okay, everybody. I have 3:45 here in the Eastern time zone, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Before we get into everything, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Joe Knieven. I'll be the moderator for today. And I want to start by acknowledging our sustaining and champion sponsors, ECDI Evergreen Collaborative Development Initiative, Equinox Open Library Initiative, Unique Management, Midwest Tape, and Stack Courier. And having gotten that out of the way, I'd like to introduce BJ Colvin, the Director of ITS at King County Library System. And with that, I will mute myself and feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's having a great start of the day. I'll just echo, one of the things that I love about conferences is being able to connect with different vendors, learn new things. So definitely check out our sponsors if you get a chance. They're critical for making events like this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure it works. Um, Everybody able to see that okay? I'll rely on you to let me know
Okay.
if you can see it.
Yep, it looks good.
Perfect. So we're talking today about mastering stakeholder management, aligning perspectives for success. We have a limited time today, so we'll try to do the best. This is a deep topic. I'm targeting this at kind of with the expectation that most of you on this call already are familiar with the concepts or, have some experience in this. So there might be some topics that are you might not relate to, you might already know. Hopefully you can find at least one thing to take away from this session. So I'll try to give some examples. I definitely enjoy interactive sessions. I think that you get more out of it. I'll have the chat up on my screen. If you have questions, thoughts, feedback, please share them as we go through this. So diving in, if it works, is kind of the agenda. I'm breaking it into four different pieces. The first is people first approach, an outward mindset, talking through really what that means and some applicable things. Hopefully, you can take away. Building trust, it's a critical piece of the work. Engaging stakeholders and then gathering feedback. So just kind of broke it down in the way my brain works. I think that these all are intertwined, so you might hear some repetition. If you repeat it, probably means I think it's important. So um, if there's things of these as we go through them that you really want to dive into, again, use that chat. Really want to engage. I have a tendency to talk fast, so if I need me to repeat something, feel free, and that's the beauty of a recorded session as well. So let's dive into people first. So when we talk about, stakeholder management, it's really, we're talking about people at the end of the day. In IT, if you went to my session yesterday as well, you'll hear just how critical people are to everything. Um, and so I really like to focus on the people when we talk about it and humanizing them. So with that, what does people first mean? I like a good definition. And so, what I've kind of done is broken it out into some different categories. So people first really means is recognizing people are not obstacles or tasks, but individuals with their own perspective, needs, and challenges. Really, what does that mean? And I'll go into each one a little bit more detail through the presentation. But this idea of whether, it's very easy to say, yep, I don't view people as an obstacle or task. But I find in my work, especially with my own team, it's a very easy thing to get into. This is our day jobs. This is managing people, whether you're on a help desk level or a executive level like I am. You're really just trying to check that task list off at the end of the day. This person asked for this thing, I need to give them a response, check. You're not really hearing and thinking through the individual's perspective and needs and challenges unless you're being intentional about it. So many of you really probably don't struggle with this, but it's important just to keep it that forefront of the mind. The next piece is, if it advances, valuing relationships as much as results, and I would say, if not more, and understanding that trust and rapport are critical to effective collaboration. So when we're looking at that relationship structure, are you valuing the relationship with your stakeholders, whether it's groups or individuals, more than the results that you're delivering them? When you lose that aspect, things start to break down. And the last one that, again, we'll dig into each of these with some other, slides, is, active listening to genuinely understand the concerns and not to just respond or solve. I've worked in IT my entire career. I've also done consulting. It's very, very easy, and I'm probably one of the most guilty people of this, of saying, here's a problem, I fixed it, and I move on. And so you're not necessarily hearing those results. So, making real, let's dig into each of these ones. How do you recognize people as individuals? I think the first thing is asking open-ended questions. I think it's very easy to come into situations as you're managing stakeholders and saying, I've heard the last things that they said. I'm going to ask specific questions so I can check the boxes and move around things. The idea behind open-ended questions is like, what are you hoping to achieve? What challenges are you currently facing? It's the idea of making it broad and not leading, and without it being tied to a topic. Especially this applies the most with, one-on-ones, but just across over those interactions. One thing I'm known for at KCLS is I end every conversation, is there anything I can do to make your life easier? That ending an open-ended question really kind of individualizes the connection with those people. The second one is learning their language and caring about it. And I would say add to this is it's not just learning their language. If there's acronyms or things that they talk about, it's really important to dive in. When I moved in KCLS before this, I was consulting in K-12. Um, Libraries has its own set of language, right? I could have, as leading the ILS team, very easily come into this and said, hey, here is, what I care about. Here's the language I use, instead of learning it. And I'll share a funny story. Is prior to this, I never knew that cereals was anything other than I would pour into my breakfast. I had to learn that language coming into libraries, and being open that if you don't know something, asking that definition and then using it is really critical for that individualization. So what are the ways that people engage and they talk about it? And it's not easy. I like to say that that's a really easy thing to do, but we get, libraries, schools, all of them really love acronyms. But when you start to reflect the language that people are using, it's really critical. Let's even look at outside the library world. Many of you might have to also interact with, your financial team. Understanding some of those key financial terms and being able to reiterate them really builds that relationship and that recognition, and then people feel cared about in kind of a subtle way. And then we all have very tough stakeholders. I'm a real big fan of, if I'm struggling with someone, doing some empathy mapping. And I don't have time to go through I would love to do just like an empathy mapping session, because I find that's something that we miss a lot. And that's really is the idea, is really just taking time. And I like to write it out. What does the person I'm working with care about? What do they see? What do they think they feel? And making sure, do you actually understand their perspective? And if you don't, right, what are questions? How do you connect with the person so you understand what baggage maybe is someone bringing into the work? If you have someone that's a really, hostile stakeholder that you're trying to engage with, do you understand maybe what's going on outside of their day-to-day work? Not that you need to know every detail, but ask those questions, especially if there's a change of behavior. So I'm a real big fan of empathy mapping. And so if that's something you'd like to hear more about, I would love to, feel free to throw it in the chat. Um, but that's that concept of really just pausing and thinking outside of the problems you're trying to solve, and really identifying that see, think, feel, and understanding that perspective. So, and I keep clicking out and losing my ability to advance slides. So I will just keep my hand on the mouse, I think. Making it real, relationships over results. So are your questions that you're asking about the results, and or just making those connections, right? How are things going over for you overall for you? There might be things, if you're meeting with a stakeholder, I meet with HR once a month, for example, asking them just how are things going overall outside of just the software we're supporting builds that relationship. They know that we care about the things. And this is some things that come really naturally to some and not others. So are you digging into the deeper relationship and not just taking care of the issues? And again, I think these intertwine, all three of them. And I just, it's the logical way my brain breaks them out. Are you also celebrating wins together? Are you pausing after something goes well to say, hey, we all did a great job, a really great conversation? yesterday in the session that this is very tough for a lot of staff that works in libraries. This was kind of pointed out. We had a really great conversation. It can be a multitude of factors that led us to not want to really celebrate, not wanting to gloat. And so I would just say, like, on personal analysis, if you're hesitant to celebrate those wins, it's not gloating, you're celebrating together. So I want to just like highlight that one a little bit. And be a real person, have some flair. The individualization, it makes you more approachable for that, and it's okay to be a human. And the last one is that transparency and honesty, admitting mistakes, being transparent. If you don't know something, saying I don't know is super powerful. I found in IT specifically, saying I don't know something is terrifying for so many of us. And so that really builds that kind of connection point. So, and then the last one before I get into kind of the leading with mindset, I like to kind of talk about active listening. I'm going to hit this one more time after this, but really that reflective listening, asking the question, did I get that right? Did you repeat back what you heard? And verify it. That's going to be one of probably your most powerful tools if you're not doing something right now and you're wondering where things are not going right. If you're not doing this, I will say that first bullet point is a game changer. Many of my team that I've coached that aren't doing this, the second they start doing it, gets a transformation of how they interact with their stakeholders. So listen to both words and for the deeper meaning. And I would say if someone has a problem, it's often there's something else deeper than that. And so just checking in with yourself, am I actually hearing just the task list that they're getting or that deeper understanding they're trying to reach? And then ask the follow-up questions, even if you know the answer, because sometimes you might find out you don't know the answer, and then that's just one more way that reassures that your stakeholders, you are listening to them. If you are thinking about how you want to respond to someone, and I know this is something that goes really basic, instead of hearing them, you're missing out on a lot. I find that it's a very natural thing that you hear something and you're already formulating the response and you're missing the rest of the context. So I want to just pause, give a second on these ones and see, give a chance for anybody to throw something into the chat. Questions, thoughts, things that you're struggling with in this area. Like a good, pause. It's not seeing a lot, so I will keep moving. Um, and I made the mistake of letting go of my mouse. So I want to talk around I there's a book that I really love, The Outward Mindset, and I've stolen this from that, so I'm going to give credit. I shared this in the other session. I consider it kind of my leadership Bible. I've read it probably a good 2 or 3 dozen times. It applies. It's one of those books that talk a lot about executive leadership, but I think it applies to even things in basic life. It's by the Arbiter Institute, and one of the things they talk about is this leading with mindset. And this chart is that inward mindset, which is that self-focused objectives and behaviors. And you stop seeing. Thank you. I love the tabs too. So those are some of my favorite points, and I highlight as well. So I would say that most people default think that they are working under an outward mindset because, hey, we're in a service industry. We're doing all of these things, but what we're not doing, even if you're trying to do the things you're doing, you're really not seeing what people's objectives are and understanding them. So, for example, if you've had a failed initiative where you've done exactly maybe what you thought somebody asked for and they're not happy, it's a sign that you're not hearing really what their internal aspects are. You're not digging into the deeper one. So it's giving an example of closing tickets. I have some staff that really just loves to get the tickets done, get them closed, and they're just wanting to make sure that their ticket number is close to zero as possible. So they're not taking the time though to see is there an underlying issue. We've all probably seen the ticket of my computer is possessed or some variation of that. The ILS is possessed, anything like that. You're not. It's very easy to just say, "Hey, I've tested everything and it's working," and close the ticket. The difference between the inward and the outward mindset is you're pausing and saying, why is this person asking me? This person took the time out of the day to ask for it. And looking through those behaviors how is my interaction really going to interact with them? And this is just a small snapshot of the outward mindset. But I really just want to, think about that responsibility that you have on your impact to other people. And when you start to think through that, it's one of the transformational things that I've really seen within my team. So I had all my managers read this book last year, and we talked through it, and really just we didn't change our behaviors dramatically, but our feedback we got because of thinking about things differently allowed us to make those connection points. And we went from probably some of the highest ratings we've gotten in customer service this last year and some of the least issues to deal with. So it is just a really great concept. And so I'm just going to peg that one a little bit. And so before I go on building trust, other thoughts, questions, don't be shy at all.
You mentioned a book a second ago. Which book? What title was that?
That's the outward mindset. So I don't know if my video shows up, and I'll put it in the chat real quick,
Yeah.
by the Arbinger Institute. The Arbinger Institute is a consulting firm that works with organizations, and this is kind of the consolidated way that they kind of approach things. I'm a big advocate for just learning through other lenses, and it's not easy. So we'll talk a little bit about building trust next. Um, and this is another one like could easily be a full day. Trust is a interesting concept. And so, the definition I pulled up is trust is the firm belief in reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. It is this idea of, do you believe in them? And we had a session with our leadership team here at KCLS about probably half a year ago, that one of the big topics we talked about trust. And trust is interesting because by default, most people think I trust or do not trust, but there's this idea of, you know, predictability. So you can trust someone to be unreliable, right? That is still within that trust. And so it's very important to think through trust is this bigger one. And I'm going to throw in my obligatory XKCD one and comic. Can't do a presentation without one. So it's not 100% true, but I do enjoy the thought process around it. And so this is the subtext of this one. I never trust anyone who's more excited about success than doing the thing that they want to be successful about. And you probably all know those who interact with those, right? That idea is that they're focused on success. How do I look? How do I interact? But not being, I want to be good at this, right? And so I think the same thing applies to when we talk about stakeholder management, really focusing in on what is that trust. And so I pulled from this next slide, some trust building behaviors, and this is based on Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust, and it's kind of a good basis. And I won't be able to dig into every one, but this is the idea. I like some of the laughing faces. What are trust building behaviors? And I want to hit on a couple of these. This is all the 13 that he points out, but really around the idea of what are you trying to do to build trust, and are you being intentional about it, right? Are you sharing information openly? And that create transparency is one I really like to talk about, because I was the treasurer for organization called the Public School Employees of Washington for about a decade. Um, and one of the things that I talked about with transparency, just to kind of give a real example, is as treasurer, we had a $13 million budget. I could walk into a room with a big box of receipts, every receipt, every penny that we spent dues dollars on, put it down on the floor and say, here, there's the transparency. This is how we're spending your money. That is not true transparency. No one has the time, the ability, or the understanding to really go through it. Instead, I can narrate and create the narrative to build understanding. And that's a huge portion of creating transparency is, are you meeting at the stakeholders at a way that they can understand, right? It's very easy for us to get too into our own lingo, as I shared earlier, and not create true transparency. We're sharing all the information, but not in a way that they can digest or interact with. And so I just like to call that one out. And then the other one really is delivering results that I want to touch a little bit on is meeting deadlines and quality expectations, or explaining when things aren't right. Sometimes things don't go the right way, and explaining what went wrong and why and what you learned from it. I think telling people like, this didn't go right and here's what we learned is a great way to build that trust, that you're a reliable kind of interaction, because things are going to go wrong. It's the one thing I can guarantee, is that stuff is never going to go the way we plan, and owning that is really, really critical. And then the last one that I really like to touch on is that listen first, understand before being understood. Are you reflecting back? And it's okay to reflect things back and not take action on it. I think that's when it's really critical. And I have a slide to put it on it. It's just saying, this is what we heard, right? You walk into the room, someone lists out 20 things that are going wrong, just reflecting that back to them and saying, hey, I've heard all these things or all these issues that are coming up. Did I get it right? Then you don't have to take action on it. You can say, well, we're going to do something different. Like, okay, we can take action on these 5 ones. We can't because of these, but I wanted to make sure you've been heard. This is probably, if you take one thing away from this session, if you're not doing this, this is probably the biggest one that I can recommend. This is what transforms relationships, because people want to be heard. There's and I can't remember the title of the book, but it's one around like negotiations, and it's done by ex FBI agent. We're working library land, so hopefully that's enough information. People can find it if they want to. But this idea of when he was working with hostage situations, right? Reflecting back on what the hostage person, hostage taker was saying, was often the thing that was the difference between getting the person released. It works universally. If you're working on a very tough negotiation with a vendor saying, hey, I know that you're coming in and you want, you're trying to make sure that you meet your metrics and all that, reflecting what they're either saying or not saying, but are kind of the truths for them, transforms those interactions. And so I'll kind of give an example. We did a strategic planning here at KCLS, and there was a laundry list of things that people wanted to see. We had to consolidate it to 3 to 5 goals. Within that, it was putting everything we heard on paper and saying, hey, we wanted to send this all out. Was there anything we missed? Did we get this right? The answer was, yep, we got everything. There was maybe a couple of small tweaks where people wanted different words. We said, okay, I've changed that in what we gathered for our information. Then this is what we're doing to take action on the information we gathered. Here's the parts we have the capacity. Here's what we have the capacity to take action on. And I love that somebody already put the book in the chat. So I love working with libraries for this reason. So I want to kind of pause again here for that reflecting back. Is this something that anybody has a challenge with? Yes, no in the chat. Thoughts, feedback on this. I want to make sure that if you have questions, we're getting a chance to answer them. And as tempting as it is, I won't call on people. So again, I'll just share that this is, again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is the one thing you take away. If you are not currently doing it, I really want to encourage you find a way to just do it. And it does take work. It takes time, but you'll find that it pays off very quickly in how much work you have to do, because you'll start to understand those trends and be able to really address things in advance as well. So we'll move on then to engaging stakeholders. So this is where we're probably going to get a little bit of, the next 2 sections are a little bit more the nitty gritty of things that I think are really important in what has made me successful engaging stakeholders. So these are ideas that you can share, take away, or say, that one doesn't work for me or my organization. Would love your thoughts on if you do any of these things. So there's really 4 areas I kind of categorize, when I look at engaging stakeholders. I maintain regular touch points. And I make sure that there's a different variety of touch points for different groups of people I'm working with, right? Like I know it's a lot about learning what kind of touch points work and don't work. KCLS, we have 50 locations throughout our county. It takes 3 hours to drive from our central office to some of our farther locations. There's no way that I can be there in person. So understanding how do we make those connections with the people that are really distance from us is critical, because it's very easy to also focus in on the people that are easiest to talk to. Creating visibility, I think, is critical. How do people know what's going on without you having to tell every person and repeat yourself 3,000 ways? Addressing issues, and then building together. So regular touch points, and I really am a firm believer in setting just a regular check-ins, something I book directly on my calendar, whether that's one-on-ones, whether that's email updates, and follow-ups with concerns. It's just setting that cadence is what I found works really well, because then it creates people are expecting it and they're familiar with it. When you show up and disappear at kind of random intervals, I find that people stop engaging. At least I found it here and in my past organizations as well. And so I find that setting that frequency and method based on need is really critical. Something that KCLS does, for example, on this one, to give you kind of a real example, is every Friday we have something that we send out called the clipboard from our ILS team. The clipboard has changes that are very impactful to maybe the day-to-day work. If we're going to change how holds are happening, or we're releasing a new feature set, or we're going to have an outage, we release that in our weekly clipboard. People are expecting it. It's every Friday, and there's a little bit of outrage if we miss it, because sometimes things go wrong. But that consistency of it is the way that's a broadcast. It's a one-way communication. It's not necessarily we're asking for feedback. These are just an update stream. So that's one that really works well. And then we actually have multiple teams contribute to the clipboard. So not just from the technical side, but also our circulation staff and our cataloging staff can add things that they find are critical to the clipboard, and people expect it. And it's one of our most read documents. We use SharePoint, so we can actually see the frequency of it. And so I looked at last week's SharePoint for our clipboard, and 1,000 people in the organization opened it. So it shows that people are really looking at it. And that also is, I love data to know is something working or not. But the consistency of it is really what helps that work well. The other one with the regular ones, I really recommend, especially with meetings. We have a monthly ILS meeting. Capture the decisions and action items in the meeting notes, and then share them out. I find that creates that feedback loop. That if you have the meeting, that a week later you're going to send out those notes. The people get a chance to interact with them, and it's a reminder of what was discussed in there. Also, if you're having a one-on-one, an email saying, "Hey, I would like to just follow up on these. This is what I heard." In the meeting, you don't have to do it in the moment. You can do it after the fact, but you create that kind of continual follow-up, and those decisions are documented as well. It's great to look them up later. And if a stakeholder raises an issue, I say follow up directly with them. We've all had those meetings, I'm sure, where someone kind of goes off the rails and say, has the thing. You might need to keep that meeting on task and say, hey, I'm going to follow up with you later. You have to then follow up with them. That's just a critical piece of those regular touch points. So want to kind of pause on those touch points. Are there things anybody wants to throw in the chat that you do to maintain regular checkpoints that work really well for you or your organization as well? Give that 7-second count and keep moving. So when we talk about creating visibility, KCLS does this in a lot of different ways, and I'm actually going to pull up on the screen one of the ones that we use, if it works. We use a system called Monday.com, and I find that it just is that kind of really easy way to track things. So let me pull it up, because I just like to see where things are. So we're working on, for example, this project right now. We're working on a public patron reservation program. So we're tracking it in this very visible dashboard. Oh, is it sharing my Monday screen or no? Might need to stop and reshare.
No, we're still on the
Let me stop
presentation.
and reshare. Awesome. Is it showing now?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is just a way that we can kind of track what's going on. This project is a little bit, behind right now, and that's just something to expect. We own that, and it doesn't make a big difference. But that transparency, and here are the things that are going on. And so I'm really great that we make this public for anybody involved in the project, even if they don't have action items. It's one of those visibility, and it stopped sharing. Let's try this again. I'm going to probably just stay on my slides then, just because that doesn't seem to work very well.
There we go. Back on
Perfect.
the slides.
So the dashboards are a really great way that you just keep regular updates. And so setting that cadence again for the regularity, something we find that really works well. I also am a big advocate of releasing reports. So, we use consultants from time to time. If they come in and do it, I publish the reports for everyone in the organization, whether they're interested or not. It's there. They know that they can see it. So that visibility of this is the work that we're doing, or an annual report kind of update. I call them a sponsor update. I try to send out one about every 6 months to the organization saying, hey, these are the projects within IT that we're working on that are going to impact the whole organization, even if they're not kind of update. I'm a big advocate for project management tools. What are things that are going on? We use Monday.com. Also, we use Power BI to get some visibility in there. Email updates are another really great way to just do it, is just that kind of regular cadence. So in telling people that cadence up front helps that predictability. So we are right now we're moving to electronic access. We send out once a month email updates on that project to kind of keep everyone up to date. People know to expect that on a monthly basis. That predictability is really critical. And then share the risk very openly. Like if we know that there's a risk of something going over budget or something, we're very open about it because it creates and builds that trust and that visibility. So again, we'll kind of pause on this visibility. Are the things that you're doing, questions about things that are working well for your organization as well. So again, give it just a couple seconds, but would love any thoughts that you might have. Okay.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say it looks like everybody's just enjoying the
Perfect.
affirmation of the things we're doing or wish we were doing better.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love the feed, kind of the interaction as well. So don't, hesitate. Otherwise, it might end up being a little bit of a short session because I always build in time for that. But, if you save, we can save some time at the end as well. Um, yeah, communication is a two-way road. It's one of the reasons I love the repetition and hearing back, that feedback loop. You also make sure you're hearing things correctly. So address issues. When an issue is identified, probably my biggest advice is, just communicate it right away. I find that people find out and they're always grumpy when they find out things on their own versus if you just told them up front, like, hey, this went wrong. We recognize it. As soon as you recognize it, obviously, sometimes you do need someone to tell you because you don't know there's an issue. Um, yeah, great feedback. Um, and so the other ones is that share what steps are taken to resolve an issue and what expected timelines for resolution, but don't guess. We had a major ILS outage probably about a month and a half ago, if I remember correctly. Update didn't go right, but we then communicated, send out those updates, and everybody just kind of breathes a little bit easier when they know what's going on. It's really tough to be angry with someone when you're just being really transparent. You know, that's probably what most people even want and ask for, but a lot of organizations struggle with it. Um, Knowing when to escalate problems that can significantly impact timelines or budgets. If you know something is going to go off timeline, just say it, like share it or bring in people that can help. Right? If you're working on just an IT project and things are going south, bringing in other teams at that point is really helpful. It's probably one of the areas that I really tell my team a lot is also don't hesitate to escalate things up to me. If things aren't going right, let me be the bad guy, right? And I can do the same thing to my boss. I need to bring in our executive director to be the bad guy on this one because things are going so poorly. And then after outage or when things go wrong, review the issue with stakeholders and show learning and improvement. Show that you learned something, and that drives back to that trust building of you showed some growth and acknowledgement, right? We messed up, we misunderstood at the time. Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is an opportunity for growth. Failure is how we grow fundamentally. So address issues. And then the last one for kind of this section is building things together. I find that if you build things with other people, they're invested in it fundamentally. The idea is if they had a say, even if it's not exactly what they wanted, but they had a say, they had their voices heard, that builds up that collaboration. So I love to do collaborative planning sessions. I love to bring people into the room and just say, hey, we're going to, this is what we're thinking. What are your thoughts? And that way gives them ownership and really early on. I also like to map out scenarios for disasters or other things. Doing a tabletop for cyber attack is an example I'll throw out there. But the idea is if you have a disaster recovery plan and you only keep it within your department, your portion of the organization, no one else knows, no one knows, you might miss the impact of other people. And that could create some hesitation when something goes wrong. So I just like to do those scenario planning and also playing out the scenario. If you don't do a tabletop for your cyber attacks every year, cyber attacks in libraries are increasing. I recommend it's just a great practice to do because, how do you communicate with people? One thing that we learned through our tabletop exercises, our leadership team has a printout of the contact phone numbers for everyone for everyone on our teams. That way, if there's a cyber attack and we lose access to our systems, we know how to call people because historically had stored it all just online in our intranet. So just a great one of building together that creates that learning. And I agree, Lynn, that's a great, approach there. If we want to see that chance, failure can be falling forward. And it almost always should be. Hold listening session for features before making changes. I love just to be able to hear like, hey, what are your concerns? What are your area? Very open-ended. I'll dig into that one a little bit around the gathering feedback with some of the specific examples there. And then problem solve together even when you know the solution. There's many times where I come in and I say, I know what we need to do because I've done this for a long time, or I know I've listened a lot. You still bring every other people in and lead them to the same decision because you could be wrong for one. I'm never going to admit, or never going to say I'm perfect. I've had many times where I knew what the solution was, and I heard from people on my team or in other departments, and I said, you know what, I had this one wrong, and that's totally great to be in that position. It's better, I think, to learn and pause. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Great one, Joe. Like, I love when I think I know the answer and one of the folks on my team has a better idea. 110%. Yeah, building consensus and ownership. So I want to pause on this kind of section. I hear see more chats. Admitting not knowing is a thing. A thing is a good thing. 100%. The hardest thing for me to learn in my life was saying I don't know, and it's probably the thing I say the most often now. It just builds trust because if you say I don't know something, people believe you when you do know something. If you know everything, people stop believing you. So. So gathering feedback. So I wanted to dig a little bit more into just again how I gather feedback, how I encourage my teams to do it, and we'll go through I think 5 different examples. I have some examples in there as well, and so I'll pause on each one a little bit. So these are probably the 5 most common ones that I use. There's other ones as well, but I think these are the ones that if you have these in your tool chest, you're really setting things up for success. So, looking at the one-on-one meetings, having those key stakeholders together, holding those listening sessions I referenced a little bit earlier, open office hours where you don't have an agenda, you have really things that are really open, surveys, and then also the information that you passively have, your ticketing system, support logs, just the passive data. So we'll talk through that and how to use that. So one-on-one meetings, I think, is probably the most critical thing in your tool chest is really connecting with priorities, stakeholders, influence in the department, and your detractors as well, as painful as they can be. I recommend that one-on-ones at a minimum, like if it's not a good one-on-one, if it's happening less frequently than once a month, depending on how much influence it is. So I have there's some exceptions to that where I'll say like annual one-on-ones make sense for bigger initiatives or topics, but for the most part, I recommend doing, a one-on-one once a month for any of your peers or people that are really at that level that are really, you need to make sure that you kind of have a stake in it. So for my organization, I do one-on-ones with all the other directors once per month. I also do one-on-ones once per month with my engineers. So while my engineers report directly to their managers, having that one-on-one connection, that skip level meeting at that engineering level, I found really not only increases their um, connection to what I'm trying to do for our vision and mission, it also increases their sense of that they feel like they are leaders within the organization. So those engineers have that feeling of that seniority. I do an annual one-on-one with everyone on my team to create an opportunity for open feedback and to connect with people. Um, so those ones are a little bit different than these one-on-one meetings. These are more about an open-ended meeting, as I, as the director, can call a meeting with anybody I want on my team with no questions asked. This once a year is an opportunity for them to take ownership of the meeting, and I really say, hey, come in, what do you want to share with me, and just kind of creates that connection point. For other stakeholders that are maybe more impactful to the day to day, yeah, I'll just great question. I'll finish this one. I'll share a couple stories around this. Um, I will say that you can build that report and understand that individual perspectives. If you really need to have some concerns addressed, I really recommend a weekly one-on-one. So a weekly one-on-one is great for direct reports or stakeholders that are a little bit higher touch. And asking open-ended questions is really critical for them. I like to have some standing questions. These are two that I put in for any of my directors. So these are my peers, so HR, uh, community relations, also like our collection management services. And it's what challenges are you facing right now, and then how are the current IT solutions supporting your goals? Are there things that are just out there? And I have these open-ended questions, and then I always recommend taking notes and doing that follow-up. Here's the things I heard from our one-on-one. Did I get it right? So, um, trying to think what's probably the best harsh critic story. Um, I'll use from my past life when I worked in schools. So one of the things that I had a pretty toxic relationship initially with was with our HR department. I was the union president there, and things just were not going well. And I know it's not IT related, but I think that it's a really good story to the point where, right, like it was so toxic that I would come in with uh, court cases, and I would highlight portions of the court cases that the school district was violating, and I would just slide it across the table. I wouldn't say anything. I would just slide it at the table to let them to read, because our relationship had deteriorated so badly at that point that was the only way that my voice was heard. So what we started doing is a every other week one-on-one with HR and the union leadership, um, the president and the director of HR, and just saying like, hey, we're not going to talk about what's going on. We're not going to talk about grievances. We're not going to talk about ongoing things. We're just going to talk about the mission vision of the organization, where things are going as a whole. And the first three or four were really rocky, because it was very hard to get out of that habit of coming in with these different things, because we weren't seeing that same perspective. But as we started to meet and talk about the bigger objectives, we really discovered that we were both working towards the same thing, but we're speaking very different languages. So what we found in those meetings was my focus was definitely 100% on making sure our members were protected, had their voices heard, and were not being having poor management decisions. We had some managers that were very toxic, and I was focused on that completely. HR director was very concerned around getting good feedback so that they could take action against some of the managers that they always thought there were issues. So we were both working of, we knew that there was management issues, but because we were taking such drastic differences, I was tying their hands and I wasn't seeing the bigger picture. So that really, by having those one-on-ones and building that report and understanding the perspective, within about 6 months, we actually went from having 3 to 5 grievances per month to one a month. And by 2 years in, we had one grievance per year on average. And so that connection point of just that regular talking without talking about some of those other bigger issues. Again, that's probably one of the deepest, kind of conflicts that I've been in, that really transformed by having those connections. A lot of humanization was really critical. Other ones that I will, share is when I was learning, contributors who don't have direct reports or participate in leadership level meetings. That's a great question. So if you're an individual contributor and you don't have direct reports and participate in leadership levels meetings, you should have one-on-ones and really advocate for connection points with those who are influencing or you're influencing their work. That's one of the reasons that I meet with my engineers, and I also encourage my team to meet outside of necessarily their level of scope. We have our data team. I encourage them to meet with the strategy manager, for example. Those connections are really critical. So even if you don't necessarily get to control that, and I think that as an individual contributor, it's a really tough place to be, because if you don't have the organizational buy-in, you're not necessarily able to change that. But it's to continue to do your portion of it and show up is probably the most critical thing. When I was um, uh, a what was my title back then? I worked on phone systems, and I'm telecommunications administrator for the school district. Telecom was not exciting. It wasn't influential, but it impacted a lot of our front desk staff. No one at the leadership really was that interested in phones. Phones were old technology, but continuing to just show up, sending out updates, and saying, "Hey, I'm available if you have issues. If your secretaries are sharing, that the calls aren't working." Continuing to show up. It probably took me about 2 years to get some buy-in from, okay, I'm able to meet with this principal that now actually sees it. That principal then talked of, okay, having that connection. And so I was meeting with every principal after that on a quarterly basis, because I just kept showing up with no judgment, right? Like, I didn't show frustrated, even though I was very frustrated. You can ask my partner at home most evenings how frustrated I was sometimes. But I just kept at work showing up and not creating that pressure. And so that was a really impactful way that kind of changed my influence of the organization. And it really is just being open to and understanding where things, fall. It can be tough. I will say that it's much easier in my current role, because I can, as I shared, I can call a meeting. When I didn't have that authority, it was more difficult. And it's one of the reasons I have those annual one-on-ones, because I want to make my team feel comfortable asking for a meeting as well. So Benjamin, let me know if that answers some of the question. I'm happy to dig into other examples too. Yep. Kathy, that's a great example. The regular one-on-ones just really do reduce how much time you spend in. And I find that most of the time I start off my one-on-ones when coming in with a new team about 1 hour per week. Pretty quickly they're getting down to half an hour a week, and it also encourages regular communication. I find that when I have one-on-ones, my team, or I start missing them, we chat less in teams. We use Teams here. We have less connections overall. And would say too is, if you're in a management position, I also really recommend letting your direct reports set the agenda for your one-on-ones. That's probably one of my big things that I did that's really switched up how those one-on-ones went. So, any other things on one-on-ones, or wanting to move into listening sessions? We can always go back if somebody thinks of something. Awesome. I love the feedback from different experiences. My experience is not, the only one out there, and so I find that this information sharing is great. One of the things that we do is listening sessions. So if we're going to do a large change, we like to do listening sessions. So currently at KCLS, we're working on an AI policy that we're working to update. We're right now kind of at the finishing line, and we're going to then host listening sessions for, hey, what are your thoughts about it? Um, and so I really like them because they bring together those are impacted by IT changes or other projects, insert what it is or whatever it is, and you give someone the feeling that they have a voice. That's why I say facilitate, don't dominate. I think that listening sessions, you can have a sharing example, and I'll have like a sample agenda on my next slide that I kind of use as my basis. Um, but really making sure that it's open-ended as possible. Set that agenda in advance and share it. So my agenda is going to be just kind of a template that you can take and use, but really you flesh it out with some details to really make sure that people understand what they're coming to, and give them kind of a voluntarily and make that objective clear. If they know what they're walking into, they're going to be thinking about it in beforehand. If they don't, you're going to get a lot of people off, and you're going to get 1,000 emails afterwards saying, I thought of these other 35 things that I didn't get to say. And you get just a lot more energy around it when you, versus if you prepare people in advance, is what I find. You're always going to walk into somebody who has a lot of energy into a meeting. That's just something that will happen eventually. Um, and being ready for it is the best I can suggest. And then doing things that you find work for your organization's culture to mitigate those. And then reward those who attend by sharing a summary of the key feedback they provide. I will always do a generalized feedback for everyone for the organization, like, hey, these are some of the things, but I like to really give a summary to those who attended that's more detailed. It's one more, as I heard, repeating back what they say, saying like, hey, thank you so much for your time. I want to make sure you knew how it's valued. I took the time to really collate everything you shared and put it together. So I'm going to share this listening session, kind of a sample agenda. And again, this is what I use to do it is, I do 5 minutes for the introductions and purpose. If it's a big, normally I don't go around the room. Normally I'm introducing myself and the ideas and sharing the purpose. Hey, we're here to listen to learn about, we did these when we moved from the client to the browser client, installed client, to the browser client. We held, I think, 6 different listening sessions. If there's somebody on my from my team in here, they probably will correct me in the chat because I don't remember. It was 2 years ago, but we really, I guess, more than 2 years ago. But really sharing the purpose, and then I like to have some prepared generative questions like, "Hey, these are some things we know that we want to hear from the conversation. Like, what is the impact of this? Like AI. What are your 3 biggest fears with AI? What are the things that you really are excited to hear about AI, just to give some examples of those generative questions. And I'll post those in an agenda so people are thinking about them. Then I always like to have an open discussion time on current challenges, right? This is just an open 15 minutes, no structure to it. We're just going to get some current challenges in there and get it out there. And I like to get these things out front before we get the specifics of what we're doing for the change. And the reason for that is I find that people dig into it, the specifics, too much, and you lose out on some really good general feedback, right? If we're talking about AI and we talk about specifically, let's say, chat GPT, people are going to dig into the chat GPT and not the bigger questions they might have about AI. Then there's the opportunity for feedback on the plan changes. And so normally I'll have a summary, and I try to keep my summary, I didn't put it on this slide, of like 5 to 10 minutes of like, hey, this is what we're thinking, share through it, walk through those details, and then specifically get some feedback on it. Like, hey, what do you think of this? Is there something we missed? Are there something you're really excited about? I like to have some prepared questions to make sure the conversation started, but I try not to lead the conversation. So again, open-ended I find is the best in most situations, except for some of the survey work. And then brainstorming for solutions. Set aside some time, and often I will say that the feedback on the plan changes eats into the brainstorming, but I like to have it on the agenda. And then closing and next steps. What are we going to do with the information? Tell them up front. What are the things that you're going to commit back to them based on these conversations? Again, it's not the specifics of it, but it's the following up. Expect a summary in 1 week, etc. I find that most listening sessions, an hour works really well. I find that 90 minutes is the max that I would go for in a listening session, because other than that, you start to lose people pretty dramatically. Less than 45 minutes, I don't find is enough time, and people feel rushed and they just try to like hammer you with information. So it's a great question. I find, like I said, an hour is a pretty sweet spot. 90 minutes for complex topics, I never go over 90 minutes. It just gets overwhelming and people tune out and you lose the last half an hour anyways. Great question. Thoughts or other questions on listening sessions? And this is something we do especially for, it's a great use for complex or touchy topics. And you don't need to be in a leadership position to schedule a listening session, I find most of the time. To the kind of the individual contributor, this is a great one that you can use, is just saying, this one at open office hours are really great for that individual because it's open-ended. Let people join that want to join. And it's important to know your audience for listening sessions. So, KCLS, our community libraries, open up at 10 some days and noon on the other days. If I scheduled a listening session at 9 a.m., no one's going to show up. So knowing the audience, knowing that, hey, 2 to 3 p.m. in the afternoon is most best for our community library staff, targeting that. So knowing your audience for who you want to show up to those listening sessions. Also makes them feel valued. Not necessarily, I would say it doesn't make them feel valued, but getting it wrong makes them feel unvalued, right? If you schedule a listening session that's really critical that most people can't attend, they're going to immediately feel unvaluable, and negative emotions are something that always are louder than the positive ones. So going to the next one. So open office hours. I love to use them as just a casual opportunity for stakeholders to discuss issues or ideas. It's a no agenda meeting. Don't have a list of things that you're trying to accomplish outside of maybe a topic. So like where you're doing an open office hours around like we again that AI is to use that example. That's a great one. If you're doing one around the ILS, you can have some guardrails, but don't structure the agenda. And with that, answer questions you 100% have the answer to. Feel free to follow up if you don't know. That's a great time to use I don't know. I have people that shop into some of my open office hours with all kinds of crazy questions that I'm just like, that's an interesting question. I was not expecting that today. It was not on my bingo card. Let me look into that and get back to you. Um, Same thing for the public and half the phone calls I get sometimes. But that's the idea is really it's just an opportunity for people to drop in, capture those key takeaways, and use them as data for things that you want to message about later. I find that questions that come up during open office hours are ones that are being other people in the organization are thinking, whether your organization is of 40 people or 1,000 people. If one person asks it, the chances of at least two people out there have that same question. Keep track of them so that you know also as they're recurring trends, right? If a question comes up once now and then comes up again in a year, start to think what's happening at that time of year that's maybe creating that cycle. You'll find that maybe that's when a lot of new people are hired or things, and you can start to target your messaging in advance if you keep track of those kind of data points. So not a lot else to say around open office hours. I think they're pretty self-explanatory and they work for some. And I definitely, again, on that individual contributor, they're a great way to just get people being comfortable to ask you questions. And they're a great one to do virtually. Questions, thoughts? Awesome. Surveys. So surveys are one that I want to recommend. While they're super useful, use them sparingly. The worst thing you can do with surveys is over survey because then people will stop responding to your survey except for your loudest detractors. So I would say no more than 3 surveys a year out to your stakeholders. Three is pushing it, to be very honest. Like, if you have maybe a lot of projects, three can do it. But I think that it's a great way to gather quantitative and qualitative feedback from that larger group. I say point blank, never more than 10 questions. If you're doing more than 10 questions, your data is probably going to start getting to become garbage. People will stop responding to them or they won't care enough to really answer it. I think 10 again is a little bit much. I try to keep mine at 6, but 10 is that maximum I do. I always recommend you want to, when you do the analysis, make your analysis unbiased as possible and share out the results. If you want, you can make them anonymous. I have mixed feelings about anonymous surveys. I find that if anonymous surveys are required because their people are worried about retribution, there's bigger culture issues that you probably need to address, right? There's always going to be a handful of people that are really worried about anonymous, if a survey is not anonymous. But if it's not, you can't follow up and ask clarifying questions for one. And again, it's a really good indicator there's culture issues. I say that if you hear more than 3 or 4 people that are worried about it not being anonymous, there's a cultural issue. Some surveys work for being anonymous. Again, I just don't find that you get to follow up on some of these action items. Only ask questions that you can take action on. So, for example, I wouldn't, I'm going to use AI as an example because it's on my mind. I wouldn't ask a question around AI and the impact on, artists' living qualities, right? Like whether it's taking money away from artists. It's an issue a lot of people care about, I care about, but I can't do anything about it. So asking that doesn't make sense. It's not anything I can really change about how AI is structured. Um, and I do like to do a couple open-ended and multiple choice questions. So I have a sample survey I'll share on the next screen that we can kind of talk through. I recommend them. They're really great for strategic planning if you need to get a larger group. The big thing is that transparency, sharing back what you heard, and rewarding people for taking the survey is really critical. And do it in a timely manner. If a year has passed, you missed your window. I'd say give yourself a reasonable 2 weeks to a month to send out maybe some initial analysis. And if you're not going to have time for it, evaluate why and whether the survey is the right route to do. So here's this kind of a sample survey. You can do like a Likert scale for these questions, but These are just questions that I like to include for just a generic survey. Again, target things that are specific to you, right? For example, if you're having one on your ILS, you can switch out. How satisfied are you with the current ILS? If you're looking at, is it our 5-year chance to evaluate? Like, is Evergreen still working for us? I hope that it is for everybody on this call. But if you are, I recommend evaluating that, because you might identify problems that you could solve before there's a big push to change your ILS that you're caught off guard with. Um, how would you rate communication from the IT team regarding project updates? Open-ended, 5. Not this one wouldn't be open-ended, but kind of on a scale. How well does the IT understand your department-specific technology needs? Again, this is something I would target at those kind of departmental ones. An open-ended one of what area of IT service do you believe that needs the most improvement? And don't take everything again for verbatim. You don't have to take action, but acknowledge it. Even if you get one acknowledgement, I always like to acknowledge, like, hey, we heard feedback on this area. Now, if something's really caustic, approach that in the way that makes sense for your organization. Common sense is still a thing that's really critical. And like, what improvements would you like to see in IT services? I find this is a really good starter. Just get the kind of what I use to get a sense of how we're doing in our organization. And run it when you think needs to. And again, don't overuse the survey tool. People stop responding. And if it's longer than 10 questions, don't do it. Just stop, because I won't respond to a survey longer than 10 questions, I have to admit. So why would anybody else? And some people will, but again, you end up elevating the angriest voices. So questions around surveys before I get to kind of that last tactic that we use here at KCLS. Okay. So ticketing systems and support logs and passive data. You already are, if you have a ticketing system, or even if you're using emails, whatever you're using to get feedback from people that are doing it, they're already giving you some really key information that you can learn a ton from without having to go out and ask them a different question, right? Are there recurring tickets? Are people always angry about X, Y, and Z process in the ILS? What are the pain points? For us, one of our pain points is dollar coins out of our kiosk. We can see that through ticketing data. We don't need to ask people. We can figure it out pretty easily. What is the tone of the average ticket? Is it frustration or gratitude? If you're seeing a lot of frustration in there, are there things that you need to address? What's causing that frustration? That might be an area you dig into more, but can identify it. I find that most of our tickets, when I took over at KCLS, there was a big tone of frustration and things, and we were able to dig into that, saying it was our average ticket response time. So we were able to set a standard and then communicate it. The average ticket will be responded to within 72 hours. Once people knew that, they weren't upset if we weren't responding in 8-9 hours. They knew that based on the load of tickets and our staffing, it was going to take us 72 hours. I would not have known that without looking at the tickets, because I don't think individuals could have shared that. They didn't necessarily know why they were frustrated, but you can see it through the data. And then when you ask and you do those targeted reach outs, you can really figure it out. How many tickets are being submitted? Is your ticketing system being used well or not? Is there pain points there? If you also, again, see that a whole bunch of tickets are coming in on Wednesdays, what's happening Tuesday night that's creating all these issues? Are you leveraging the tickets to follow up with people? Are you saying, creating an opportunity for engagements when you're closing out those tickets or responding to them? And then what are your most common tickets? Again, just looking at the data that you passively have there. So it's just a great tool that I really want to recommend. Look at this great data resource you probably already have, and look at the metrics and look at it regularly. And so I'm going to pause there and go to the thank you slide. I think my email's on the screen. I'm happy to reach out to me, after the session. One of the things I love is sharing the shared learning. I learn a lot from engaging with people. Hopefully people learn, with the interactions with me. But I think one of the opportunities we have as a community, looking at the Evergreen community specifically, is creating shared learning. And so I want to open it up for questions, thoughts, feedback for our last kind of 10 minutes here. A great question from Kathy. Is there a maximum group size beyond which they become ineffective? I would say that if you're looking at If you're looking at high attendance rates for listening sessions, most of the time I find that I end up, we have an organization of 1,000 people. We end up with, if we have for 4 or 5 opportunities for listening sessions, that's the key, is offering multiple sessions, kind of understanding what your usual attendance is. That naturally spreads out people. But I would say after about 30 people, they stop becoming effective. And that's where you might need to do some invitational listening groups, right? Targeting your key stakeholders, sub areas, offering more sessions, structuring it in a way that makes sense. Again, we have 1,000 staff that could show up to one of our listening sessions. So I find that if I offer 5 listening sessions, I normally end up with a nice 20 to 30 people per group. It's also knowing what's on the calendar. It's easier in an organization like KCLS because I can see our global calendar. I know, okay, these are the dates that, there are other activities going on, so maybe we'll reduce the group size as well. But I would definitely say 30. Oh, great question. Angered in a meeting. So the first step is, kind of that soft thing. Hey, I will say, I will acknowledge their experience. I will say, one of the things to say is that feels like there's a lot of emotions around this topic, or a lot of energy, not emotions. I've been working on switching it to energy. I found energy works better than emotions. I say it just feels like, there's a lot of energy on around this topic. Let's have a one-on-one after this. If that doesn't go away, it is part of what I consider kind of an accountability, say asking someone to leave, right? Like if they're continuing to get aggravated or trying to derail the meeting, if you've called the meeting, can ask them to leave. Um, Yep, and I've learned the hard way, but energy I found has been a really good one. My partner works in mental health and eating disorders, and she's the one that taught me that. So I have to give credit where credit is due. But saying energy, there's just a lot of energy around it. It hopefully gives some self-reflection for sure. But if it doesn't, you just have to be willing to ask the person to leave, and if they don't, remove them from the meeting. I've only had to remove one person from a meeting. It was an in-person meeting. Again, the union days were crazy. It was a plumber. He was yelling in my face. By the time we actually had 2 of our other union members escort him out because he was yelling and spit on my face. Just as a, interesting situation. The funny thing was that it was about pay raises. I'll just share this kind of short story. It was about pay raises. Entry level employees were getting extra $5 an hour because our scale grew so rapidly for the facilities department. And he was really upset about it because, deserved it. And I looked at him and I said, "You're one of the people that's getting the extra $5." And he's like, "I'm even angrier now." And that's actually what blew him up, was trying to say, like, it didn't make sense, but he didn't, so some people are just irrational, is kind of the point of that story. So just, if 99% of the time, though, just drawing attention and just offering an avenue for them to get that emotion out in that kind of a one-on-one environment has worked really well for me. If in a library that's small enough, it doesn't hurt to make rounds and talk to people in other departments to get their sense of things, if you're not a leadership position. It helps know what other people in departments are thinking when it comes to things that affect the library as a whole. I will say, even if it's not a small library, it works really well. We have 50 locations. I try to visit every location once per year. It doesn't always work out. So it's probably closer to once every 18 months. And I just like to be there, right? Like I don't come in with an agenda. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be there. I let the management know and just give them an hour to just anything that's going. And then I also like to work show up in libraries and work when nothing is happening, not a scheduled opportunity. I will bring my laptop and have a couple meetings because I find that I get to see how people are interacting with the public, and I really get to engage in a different way. And then I also show up as a patron. If you're part of a library system and you're not an active patron, you're missing out on a really great opportunity. I take my 8-year-old daughter to kids programming. I go to programming that I find interesting, and I try not to show up as the director of IT. I just try to show up as a patron and learn and see what's going on. And I've gotten some of my best ideas from just watching when no one knows I'm there. Not because I'm trying to spy on staff, right? I'm just seeing what are the interactions, right? What are the interactions with the patrons? Seeing what the day in and day out is also informs some of the ILS. Are there pain points to someone that I wouldn't realize because staff might not be seeing it? So I recommend just spending time in libraries, 100%. Other questions? These are great ones.
Yeah, and that was awesome. I wish I could find a way to come into my library just as a patron, or either of my locations. Realistically, They know me a mile away.
Yeah.
I'm surprised neighboring libraries don't know I'm a librarian when I come in.
It is tough. It is tough. It's easier. Caseless has 50 locations, so I can sneak a little bit on the radar. And especially because I dress like this on a regular basis, I come in jeans and a t-shirt, and no one even thinks that I'm me anymore. So
Yeah, it is good to see how people are interacting with the stuff, though, even just from a what are the like you said, what are the pain points of the software they're using that would not necessarily filter back to you or to your department. So fantastic.
yeah,
Well, while we're waiting for other questions, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of all of us in the room for a fantastic presentation.
very welcome. I love this kind of stuff. So again, take my email. Feel free to reach out.